Hello and welcome to the program. This is another Diplomat podcast, and with me is Arte Hoekstra. I hope I've pronounced that correctly. Arte is a Dutch journalist, a freelancer. He's also just been re-elected as president of the Overseas Press Club of Cambodia for a second term. And welcome to the program, Art.
Thank you, Luke. Good to have.
Yeah, now congratulations on being re-elected. What type of year was 2020? It's notorious for everybody else. I don't think I know anyone who had a good year.
It was a very strange year for all of us. I mean, for me personally, when it comes to work, it very much impacted my traveling. Because normally I'm also doing a lot of work outside Cambodia, and that was basically impossible this year. And everything is about COVID.
Right, and then the publications haven't been incredibly generous this year at all. Everyone's looking at cutbacks and trying to find ways of paying you less and extracting more. I presume you've had the similar deals.
Me personally, not that much. I did notice with a lot of other colleagues that there is less money. What I did notice is that because COVID is such a global thing, you have to compete certainly with correspondents all over the world, because we're all writing about COVID.
Yes.
So I'm writing about COVID in
So
Cambodia.
one story world at the moment.
Yeah. So that can make it really difficult to compete.
Right.
And to get your story out.
And primarily you write for Dutch publications, so perhaps you're isolated a little bit more than others were in that sense.
Yeah, I think so. I'm lucky with that, and I've been writing them for a number of years, and that puts me in a better position than many others, because I'm like their guy here. I'm their correspondent, so there is still that stability.
Loyalty goes a long way in this business when you can find it. How has this all impacted on the press club, on the OPCC, which is often a benchmark for how other press clubs and foreign correspondence clubs are feeling the pinch around the region? There's just not the number of correspondents here as there once was. Before the 2018 election, it was probably a couple of hundred. Now a pool of a couple of hundred foreign journalists. Now it's probably about 20 or 30. How is the club coping with those sorts of numbers?
Yeah, we have about, I think, around 30 members at the moment.
Okay, that's actually sounds like it's a bit higher.
Yeah, I think
than last year.
I think it has gotten a little better over the past couple of years. I think 2018, 2019 were really bad years. I think 2020 there has been a couple of new people have arrived this year and late 2019, but the number of foreign journalists is still quite low here compared with how it was in the past. But we are dealing with it. We are trying to stay relevant. We are trying to keep that function as a networking, as a meeting place for journalists, and also to share information and to share experience.
How you cover the region, but in particular Indochina, and we've had COVID and there've been all sorts of issues, like in Cambodia. There was a crackdown before the 2018 election. Newspapers closed, became business friendly, but Laos has gone very quiet of late. Communist state. Vietnam is having issues as well. The Reporters Sans Frontières report recently came out. 50 journalists died around the world this year, or 2020, and of them 2/3 died in what's regarded as peaceful countries. How do you find journalism and the media industry in Indochina at the end of a very interesting, tricky, difficult year?
It's tough. I think it's tough for many of us, for many colleagues around the region, including in Cambodia. But I also see that people are still moving on. People are still pushing on. There's still a lot of good journalists out there. But it is tough, and there's a lot of push against independent media. We see that all around the region, where publications are under threat and where journalists are intimidated. And I think what is also part of why that is happening is probably because the rest of the world is so busy with its own problems, and then mainly
and that goes back to COVID.
COVID and economic crisis and all that. This is happening outside of that view.
Yes.
And I think that is a very dangerous thing, because it means that it doesn't get seen that well as before.
Yeah.
So yeah, that is it is under threat.
In Cambodia, how do you find the relationship between the government and journalists? My personal experience is that it's never been as harsh as some people make out, but at the same time, it can be extremely trying, very difficult to get information, confirmation, get you can put a request in for an interview and it gets passed on until the use by date of the story is long gone. How's the press club finding that, and how do you see the state of the Cambodian press corps at the moment, particularly among the local publications, say?
Yeah, it is. It is difficult, but I think it has been difficult for a long time. I think the relationship between the government and the media could be better. However, it's not always that bad as outsiders like to believe. I mean, it is still pretty easy, for example, to get a press card. If you are even if you are a freelancer in Cambodia, it is still pretty easy to go to the Ministry of Information and to have your press card. And there is also ministries that are available for comment,
Sure.
or spokespersons.
Yeah.
But there is, on the other hand, what I personally find difficult sometimes is the lack of public information,
Right.
the lack of data, the lack of statistics.
Yes.
I think that is really important for journalists, and that can be quite difficult to get it from the government.
Yeah. No, I was at the courts yesterday, earlier this week, and as you know, there's 200 dissidents, opposition supporters, all lined up before the courts. I went out there, and it was quite amusing actually. The heavily armed security guard looked at me twice, three times. I showed him a press card. He was scratching his head and he said, "Okay, come in." And I went in and I saw the court officials in the admin office. I told them who I was and I wanted this, and they looked at me and said, "Oh, this court case is political." I'm like, "Well, yes, I guess so." And they said, "Okay." And they took me upstairs. They pulled out the charge sheets. They couldn't have been more helpful. They gave me everything I needed, where I kind of assumed that might have been difficult. But often when you ask, you do get here.
Yeah, yeah, not always. I mean, there's also been cases where it's not possible and where
Right.
you just have to wait outside until somebody comes outside and maybe tells you something.
Yeah.
Maybe what is missing sometimes is one straight line. There's not one straight line that we can follow. It's not how to say it. It differs per case. Every case
Right.
can be different.
Right.
Like your example, that's a good example of how it should be. But that's not how it always goes, unfortunately.
Mind you, I have similar experiences dealing with Western embassies here, where stories which were considered absolutely not controversial a few years ago now get referred back to, say, with the Australian embassy, they get referred back to Canberra. Canberra can be just as difficult when it comes to getting information out of as Phnom Penh. And we were seeing this right around the region, little alone try and make contact with Cambodia, Laos or Bangkok or Indonesia, and we have to deal from afar because of COVID again. So if we're writing about countries outside Cambodia, which a lot of us do, getting access to people, access to information, it's almost impossible. You have to rely on LinkedIn and Facebook, which is it's all a bit turgid.
Yeah, and that is often the case. And very often you also see you have to rely on what law is it, if for example there's a case at the court, then you often have to rely on like the lawyers
Right.
of the accused,
Yep.
giving you the information and not so much from the court.
Right, and then you can be accused of running something that's loaded in the favour of the accused, and it's like, well, you're not talking to us. What are we supposed to do?
Yeah, that is that challenge. On the other hand, I do believe, and I think there's a difference between foreign journalists and Cambodian journalists.
Sure.
We as foreign journalists, we still have enough freedom, I think, to report and to do our work. I know it's a little more difficult for Cambodian journalists who are.
They do get pressured by the government. They get phone calls in the middle of the night.
Yeah.
They have editors jumping on them. Stories get changed without their knowledge. There's all sorts of gremlins in the system.
Yeah, that happens, and I think for us as foreign journalists, and most times we have the freedom that we need to do our stories, to do our work. And I think that is still good, and that's still something that we should keep as well. Try to keep at least.
Well, this brings us around to, as we touched on briefly before, is the online media, which deserves enormous amounts of criticism, which I think we're all au fait with. But if it wasn't for the online media and where it is now, I mean, access to information is greater than ever it was before. Online publications seem to be stepping up to the plate and filling the void that was left a couple of years ago when, say, in Cambodia, where the Cambodia Daily was sold and where the Cambodia Daily was closed and the Phnom Penh Post was sold off to friendly business interests. And that void, it's quite robust out there in many ways. A lot of the stories aren't necessarily well researched, particularly, and when I say these online media outlets, I mean there are small news organisations being set up in provincial cities and reporting in English. Cambodia News English is one, and they seem to be doing a very good job, I think, in terms of basic news stories, which might be more about cops and robbers, but in an era of COVID and reporting little outbreaks or how things are happening in the provinces, I think they're doing a very good job.
Yeah, I agree. I also think on a more national level, for example, with VUD, they really stepped up
Voice
their
of
game.
Democracy, yeah.
Voice of Democracy, they really stepped up the game. But also Cambodia News, they hired several reporters over the past year,
Right.
and they cover many different issues. I also think Tamai has improved their game, and we've seen Southeast Asia Globe going from print to only online.
And it is doing
they're doing well.
Yeah.
They're doing good story. They're doing really good work. And I think that is a very good development, especially compared with how things were 3 years ago.
Right.
When we lost the Daily.
Yep.
And then suddenly the Post was taken over, and many good journalists left the Post.
Right.
If you compare it with that time, 2-3 years ago, it has improved. And maybe online is never going to be exactly the same as print.
Well, it can't be.
It can't be. It's impossible. And for example, the Cambodia Daily, they always had this beautiful weekend magazine with really big stories.
Right.
And you don't have that anymore, and that's a loss. But I do think that online media, they do fill part of the void, a big part of the void, because thanks to them we still know what's going on, what's happening.
It's also provided much needed news outlets for countries like Vietnam, which has not had a free press in the south since 1975 and the north since 1954, if it ever existed before then under the French. There's really nothing coming out of Laos, but there are a lot of special interest publications online which are writing about Laos. I mean, and by that I mean, like, say, the Mekong Digest. A lot of stories are being written about the Mekong, and even the Mekong River Commission has stepped up its game in terms of releasing information to the public, which is now coming out of Vientiane. Any improvements we talk about are kind of small steps, but you can see the dynamics of the industry changing.
Yeah, definitely, it's changing, and you can see it in Thailand as well. In Thailand, for a long time, Bangkok Post and The Nation, that were the two big newspapers.
Right.
At some point, The Nation went completely online, and it lost part of its relevance, I think.
Indeed, I mean the Nation was in trouble for a lot of years before that. It was by the end it was being run on the smell of an oily rag, as we used to say.
Yeah, you can see in Thailand as well that there have been some online publications that really stepped up their game. For example, Disrupt.
Right.
I think it's a pretty small publication, but they do really good stories.
Right.
They do very good opinion pieces. They do very critical news pieces, and they're also filling the void there, at least part of it. And if you don't have these online publications and these print publications, they either shut down or they have to shrink in size. and that doesn't get filled up by online. What do we still have?
Right. And in the age of COVID, I mean, sometimes I think people should be thanking their lucky stars because, okay, people are doing it hard, they're doing it tough, and many are in isolation and living in fear of catching the dreaded disease, but they have comms. You can communicate quickly, easily, cheaply anywhere on the planet, and you've got access to stories and you know what's going on, which is the prime job of a journalist, is to inform the public so it knows how to behave, what to do. And in the COVID crisis, that's really been borne out.
Yeah, definitely. And of course, it is difficult reporting during COVID crisis because we are all facing, not just facing the threat of the disease, but also facing the consequences for example, when it comes to meeting people.
Right.
It's a lot more difficult now to do interviews, to do face-to-face interview. People say like, well, yes, you can interview me, but can you please do it over the phone or over Zoom?
It's amazing everything's just stopped.
Yeah, and of course it's great that we have the technology to do it over Zoom or over Skype, but it is not exactly the same as doing a face-to-face interview where you meet someone and you can see somebody's expression from nearby. But on the other hand, we do have this technology. We have everybody now has a good internet connection.
Yeah,
and
it works.
We can do so many things from isolation.
That's right, including countries like Cambodia.
Yeah.
Although I think in Vietnam and other places there's a big push down on that, but access to VPNs and there are lots of ways around these things. Now, tell me, what do you think are the big issues facing our marvellous region in 2021?
The big issues, of course, COVID. I mean,
right.
The COVID outbreak that is still happening. You can see it in Thailand now, where there's a big outbreak. But apart from that, I think economy.
Right.
With the exception of Vietnam, all countries in this region are doing quite bad, and they're looking at a very serious crisis. Thailand, Laos, Myanmar, Cambodia, all of them are facing very serious economic challenges that they have to address, and that means there's going to be a lot of people falling back into poverty.
Right.
I think that's going to be a very big issue, and of course, then there's always, that has been going on for a long time. There's the rise of China.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, China's presence has been interesting this year because I think there was a pullback starting to happen. We could see it 12 months ago in Cambodia. They banned online gambling, and there are a lot of cowboys running around in the south of the country, and they were being pulled back, and then COVID broke out at the same time, and that seems to put the clamps on the kind of Chinese expansion, not so much in Vietnam, obviously, but certainly Cambodia, Laos, and I think we're sort of poised to see what will happen next. And we've got untold rows of skyscrapers, not just in Phnom Penh, in Sihanoukville, and they're starting to go up in Kampot, these sorts of places, and they're all empty. And there's been a lot of talk about Chinese migration, bringing people down to work here, bringing down retirees who want warmer weather, access to cheaper health facilities, all those kinds of things which Cambodia is starting to get better at, but it's all on hold. And whether or not we see that go, I think 2021 will be an interesting year for what the plans are for a lot of these governments.
Yeah, definitely. I think China will still be here. China needs Southeast Asia. China wants to have a big footprint here.
Yep.
You can see it in Laos, for example, where the Lao government is in financial difficulties, and China is helping them.
Yeah, right. The old school debt trap now. I mean,
yeah.
It was a term we didn't have 3-4 years ago, and now it's just it's run riot around the world. Fiji, Africa, Sri Lanka. And I think it's a term that Beijing would prefer us not to use, but oh well.
Yeah, well, Beijing will probably say we are helping, and
yeah.
In a sense they are, but what does Beijing expect to get in return?
Well, in Laos they got control of the electricity grid, and the whole point of building hundreds of dams was to produce an electricity grid, and now they don't have it. So
yeah. And we have to see how that's going to go in 2021.
Mm-hmm.
are the Chinese going to return in the same numbers as they were before the pandemic?
Right. Or much more.
Or much more, or much less. And what is all these Chinese investments? How good or bad are they really?
Mm-hmm.
I think some of them are good. I'm also sure that some of them are less good.
Right, and the problem there is that the contracts are always opaque, and I've had numerous diplomats simply say to me, we don't know what's in these contracts. And that makes it, I mean, they're obviously talking from their own agenda as well. They have their own companies that want to bid for contracts, that kind of thing, but they don't know what's in them, where with other countries they do. And that's another spanner in the works.
Yeah, yeah. And I think we as journalists, we have to stay critical, and we have to try to get the full story, which is really difficult, of course. But we have to stay critical, and we also have to see, okay, what are the consequences? What does this mean, for example, in Cambodia for the Cambodians? When you have all these investments coming in, what does it mean for the local people who live there now?
And of course, there are people here closely aligned with the government who have amassed incredible fortunes worth billions and billions of dollars over the last 10, 20 years. And a lot of Cambodians who are struggling in the villages or working in a garment factory for $200 a month would be quite, 6 days a week, 12 hours a day, would be quite justified in asking what's going on here.
Yeah. I think inequality is a big issue as well, and that's gonna be one of the major issues in 2021, because it's inequality that is probably going to increase.
Mm-hmm.
People aren't going to lose jobs. People are already losing jobs because of this crisis. People are losing part of their income. People are, not just in Cambodia, but also in Myanmar and in Thailand and in Laos probably as well, are very much in debt.
Right.
While there is other people who have a lot of money and just make more and more and more.
Right.
And how are you going to address that inequality?
Right.
I think that's going to be a really big challenge for many countries around the region. How are you going to address that? And because what may happen if you don't address that on time?
Yeah. And Cambodia has seen lots of protests over the years. It's been very quiet in the last 2 years. And certainly in Thailand, the protests have re-erupted, the pro-democracy movement. You have a government that is military controlled in the elections, which the Economist described as ineptly rigged, which I thought was a lovely term. I think the other big change for the region is the election of Joe Biden as President of the United States. Donald Trump hardly covered himself in glory in Southeast Asia, and I must add that Barack Obama didn't do that much until his pivot towards Asia and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which Trump pulled the US out of. Certainly that arrived a little bit too late. But how important do you think the Biden administration, and what do they need to do to kind of perhaps reassert themselves or get America's interests out there and back into Southeast Asia?
It's a good question. I think Biden. I'm expecting Biden to do better than Trump. I expect them to have a better foreign policy for Asia. Also with the eye on the rise of China. And if you look, Trump didn't do that much, and he more or less ignored Southeast Asia, maybe with the exception of Vietnam a couple of times.
Mm-hmm.
And I think before that, Obama also he did a little bit more. For example, with Myanmar, helping Myanmar.
Right.
He and Hillary Clinton did a lot to help Myanmar in their transition, which later on then
backfired with Aung San Suu Kyi, genocide of the Rohingyas.
Entirely. But maybe Trump should have done something there to keep that relation. But I think I'm hoping that Biden will go back to where Obama was, and maybe a little bit more. Also to have a better balance in the region between China and the US.
Yeah, they're forcing people to choose, or forcing countries to decide. A lot of bureaucrats, governments, politicians are complaining privately. They don't say, like saying it too loud, that the the Americans are putting pressure on us to choose between Washington or Beijing. And they don't want to make a choice. They want to deal with both. Having said that, Beijing hasn't exactly made it easy either. And this could be how this issue gets handled over the coming years. It could be quite interesting, particularly with the South China Sea, the dispute there, and also other analysts are pointing out that the Mekong River dams were in a 2-year drought. Water levels are at record lows, fish catches are at record lows, and that the Mekong River is set to become the big regional issue on the international agenda after the South China Sea.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what the US should do, what Biden should do, is first of all improve relationships here again, be on the ground and show them that you are serious in rebuilding trust and rebuilding these relationships, and I think from the perspective of Southeast Asian countries, it makes sense to want to have both. You want to have a good relationship with China, but also with the US. I understand that they don't want to choose. Because they are small. If they choose, then if they choose one as their friend, then does that mean the other one is the enemy?
Right.
It could mean that. I mean, it could be seen as that.
Sure.
And that's not what you want. You don't want to be in a position like that. I think some countries have been in a position in the past and it did not go well.
No, indeed. And this country had a long 30-year civil war with a genocide.
Yeah.
Bloody horrible, really.
Yeah.
Vietnam was the same, Laos was the same.
Yeah.
In fact, right across the region, Indonesia, Malaysia, Myanmar, they've all had long periods of civil war or conflict with ethnic groups.
Yeah. So you want to have a good balance, and I think that is best for all, especially for the countries around here. There is some very serious issues that they need to address, like the Mekong River. Because that is a big problem. I mean, so many people depend on that river.
Right.
You're talking not just millions, tens of millions of people.
70 million in the lower Mekong basin alone.
So you have to do something there, and that's where very much you need to have a very strong voice against China there, I think. Because China is, if China wants it his way, then there will be more dams. There will be more control over the river.
The Stinson Center in the United States is saying that they're planning more than 400 dams, as opposed to, I think the number we had previously was 140.
Yeah.
And for what purpose, no one seems to be able to say, except that there's a lot of businessmen who are making a lot of money on building these things.
Yeah, yeah. So I think we could really use the help from the United States, but also perhaps from the European Union to to do something against that, to offer an alternative.
Right.
And so people here have more choice, and the region has a better balance, and I think a better balance also means more stability.
Right.
And I think that will be very good for everyone.
Indeed. And on that note, what sort of fortunes are you hoping for in 2021? You've recently had a child. You're married to the country. Your wife is Khmer, and she works with you.
Yes.
What are you hoping for?
What am I hoping for? First of all, I'm really looking forward to be able to travel outside Cambodia again.
Right.
I mean, this year, for example, I in the beginning of this year, I was hoping to go to Myanmar for the elections. And then the big protest happened in Thailand. And normally,
yeah, we would be going.
I would go there.
That's right. Yeah,
you would go there.
Yes,
well.
Absolutely.
And the elections in Myanmar, it was a very important election, but none of us were there.
And there was no coverage of it. Well, there was coverage of it, but it was extremely limited.
It was very limited. So what I'm really hoping for, at least to have open these borders again, so that people like us, we can cross the borders again, and we can go to these countries and we can report from the ground like we have always done. And on a personal note, I also really hope that I can travel to Europe again and see
home for a while.
Go home for a while, see my family, and because that's also really difficult right now.
Indeed it is. And on that note, Arte Hilstra, thanks very much.
Thank you, Luke.